Good afternoon, everyone, dear friends, and good evening to our guests joining us from Israel. My name is Csaba Nikolényi. I'm director of the Azrieli Institute of Israel Studies at Concordia University in Montreal, and we are bringing to you this very important event, briefing from Israel, to discuss the aftermath of the pogrom, the massacre of October 6th and 7th, and its aftermath. Our guest today is Professor Dr. Shawn Zelig-Aster, who is very well known in Montreal and, of course, in Israel as well. It's a special honor and a special delight for me to welcome Shawn, with whom together we designed and led a joint summer school program for our students in Israel 2 short months ago. And it's just heartbreaking and horrifying to see the carnage affecting the places and the sites and the communities that we visited and learned about together with our students and with Shawn's colleagues. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Shawn. I just want to say briefly that in normal times, Shawn is a professor, is a big biblical researcher, a biblical scholar, a scholar of the land of Israel and archaeology. But today he is going to tell us about something very topical and very different. And as I said, the aftermath and the shock and how Israel and the Israelis deal with the massacre that devastated families, communities, with a death toll that is now surpassing well over 1,000 innocent victims. So without further ado, then, Shawn, I would like to turn this over to you. We agreed that you would speak for about 25 to 30 minutes. And at that point, we'll open it up for a Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Csaba, for the invitation. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And I'm sorry for the circumstances. What I'd like to do is give a brief overview of where we're at now, give some ideas of questions of where we're headed, and then open up to questions, which I'll answer to the best of my ability for someone who's a resident and watching the events unfold. When Saturday morning at 6:45, I woke up, but way back when we were all young and innocent. We're going back in the time tunnel to a time when the picture here of the nice land. Saturday morning at 6:45, we heard sirens, and we immediately thought, oh, well, maybe there's some small incident between Hamas and Israel. And my first reaction was that Hamas is firing at Likud strongholds like Beersheba to create tension against the anti-government areas in Tel Aviv, and all kinds of thoughts like this, which were obviously completely false, but shows how little we understood of what was unfolding on Saturday morning. That's one of the points that collapsed on Saturday morning. One point is the idea that there are all these tensions between the anti-Likud areas and the pro-Likud areas. Those tensions have collapsed, and they're not there anymore. Another point that's collapsed is a standard distinction in political science. Once upon a time, I was a political science student and even wrote a thesis in political science. And there's a standard distinction in political science and security studies between what's called current security and basic security. Current security are terrorist attacks that don't threaten the existence of the state, and basic attacks are attacks that threaten the collapse of the state. Armies marching on the capital, it's a classic example of basic security. But that distinction really collapsed on Saturday morning, because on the one hand, you could argue that these attacks are really current security attacks. They're terrorist attacks that kill numbers of people. But they really do threaten the collapse of the state, because if these attacks recur, it will not be possible to hold the Negev, southern portion of Israel. And without holding the southern portion of Israel, it is very, very difficult to maintain a viable state. The landmass is simply not enough for the military security and economic needs of the 10 million people who are Israeli citizens. And so there's a very serious threat that these attacks form to the basic security of the state. And I want to emphasize that point. From that the collapse of this distinction flow all the other points I'm going to be making. Saturday's attacks are an attack on the continued existence of the state of Israel. The state cannot hold territory if these attacks recur. Another belief that collapsed Saturday morning. There is this belief that's now called into question. I wouldn't call it collapse, but I would call it very much in question, that Israel is a strong state with a strong army. That belief is very much called into question, and the large implication of the elimination of that belief or the shaking of that belief is the question of what Hezbollah is going to do. On the map that I took from the BBC, which you see at the left side of the screen, you see Hezbollah's missile coverage of almost all of the state of Israel. Hezbollah has thousands of highly accurate missiles and right now is being deterred from attacking. Hezbollah has done several feinting actions, F-E-I-N-T, feinting, where they pretend to attack, where they launch small-scale attacks, where they create chaos. But Hezbollah has not unleashed its missile arsenal against Israel, both because of Israel's threats and because of the American threats against Hezbollah's patrons in Iran. And so right now, Hezbollah is being deterred. How that will develop, time will tell. If Israel is able to sustain the belief that it's a strong state with a strong army, Hezbollah can be deterred by Israel. And that question is extremely important because Hezbollah can unleash a missile barrage that will make life unlivable in Israel. The fact that Hezbollah has not done that up to now suggests that Hezbollah is being deterred either by Israeli power, by American power, or by some combination thereof. Now, there is a very wide, I was saying to Chaba a few minutes ago, there is a very, very widely held belief, consensus, wall to wall in Israel now, in Arab society in Israel, in Jewish society in Israel, across the board, that Israel must not only attack Hamas and respond, but Israel must deny Hamas all military abilities. And that must happen in the near future. That we are not looking at another round where Israel will attack and Hamas will respond and then we'll reach a ceasefire, but that there will be a complete elimination of Hamas military abilities, and that has to happen in the next few months, preferably sooner. And the reasons for that are twofold. On the one hand, Hamas threatens Israel's continued existence, right? Hamas threatens the basic security. We're not dealing now with small-scale terrorist attacks. We're dealing with a very serious threat to the existence of the state. And two, because only destruction of Hamas can deter attacks from Hezbollah. And so the two things together force Israel to eliminate Hamas military abilities. And that is a consensus across the board in Israel, to the extent that any government official were to come out against this, there would immediately be huge demonstrations for his removal, larger than those we've seen in the past. So that there is a consensus in Israeli society that Hamas military capabilities must be eliminated, period. This is not, as some of my colleagues have suggested, the result of a call for revenge. Revenge is not part of this calculus. The calculus is simply a security calculus that Israel cannot exist with Hamas having the military abilities that it has now. Well, the good news, or the good for Israel news at least, is that morale is high. I've spoken to people who are in the military, out of the military, across the society. Israelis are not fleeing. The inflow of people to Ben Gurion Airport is much stronger than the outflow. Thousands of Israelis are returning from abroad, trying to be part of this. People are volunteering. There are huge piles of food and equipment being collected. People are extremely, extremely supportive of the state. No, there is no despair. Let me give a brief timeline of events we've seen since Saturday morning, and I'll try and explain why events have moved so slowly. Many of us are disappointed that events have moved slowly, and I'll try and explain why. The first response of the state of Israel on Saturday and Sunday, when the scale of attacks became clear, and they were fairly clear by 9:30 a.m., was the first step was the drafting of hundreds of thousands of military reservists. And that began Saturday at 9:30. People got calls by Saturday at 9:30 a.m. right? The attacks began at 6:45. Within a couple of hours, military reservists were being drafted. Army were sent to the attacked areas. This took several hours, longer than it should have, but there was an immediate military response. And that continued until Monday afternoon with locating, arresting, or killing of Hamas fighters throughout the attacked area. And then reestablishing the fence. Of course, by Saturday afternoon, families whose loved ones had been killed, kidnapped, attacked, wanted to know what happened to them. And they were blaming the government for what they called chaos. No one knows what happened to my son, daughter, son's girlfriend, etc. And I know families who went through this. But the government was not responding to families at that point. The government was focused on sending the army in to kill and arrest any Hamas fighters who are still there. And that took until Monday afternoon to do that, because the area was large and there were more than 2,000 Hamas fighters who came in, and 1,500 of their bodies were strewn across the western Negev. And so this was a deliberate prioritization on part of the government that the first priority is to eliminate the invaders. And the result was that families who wanted to know where their loved ones are didn't know. The process of gathering the bodies began on Tuesday. I just spoke to someone who's involved in that process now. There were teams of 50 volunteers working in 24-hour shifts, 50 morning shift, 50 afternoon shift, 50 night shift, working through the western Negev in cooperation with the army, while the process of fighting against Hamas was still ongoing. Volunteers were there gathering bodies and collecting them to identification points. The identification of the bodies is not being done in the field where people were killed. Rather, they're taken to centers, and in those centers, there's a fingerprint and dental X-ray identification process that's taking place. And this is important in understanding what's happened, because the emphasis on an accurate and total identification of each corpse found means that there is a very slow process of getting a total list of hostages. In other words, no one up to now has gotten a total list of how many hostages there are, because no one yet knows who all the bodies who are sitting in the morgues are. The process took time because they are emphasizing an absolute identification. They're not working on the basis. I was at a shiva today of a soldier who was killed in Kisufim. The other soldiers in the unit told the body identification people, his body is located in such and such a place. The body identification people gathered the body, brought it to the morgue, and said, we need to identify on the basis of fingerprints. We're not going to identify on the basis of memory. Memory can sometimes err due to the shock of events. And so only on Wednesday did funerals begin. The complete identification of all the bodies is not yet completed. And as a result, there is not yet a complete list of hostages, and families whose loved ones, there are still families who do not know if their loved ones are lying in the morgue or or hostages in Gaza. And that is a serious problem, but that is the offshoot or the outcome of the emphasis on an absolute identification. Since that time, however, regardless of this frustration, since Saturday afternoon, there have been air attacks on Hamas, trying to eliminate the missiles which have continued to fly from Gaza into Beersheba, to Ashkelon, to Ashdod, to Tel Aviv, and everywhere else. And those missile attacks are the focus of the army's attacks on Hamas, trying to eliminate missile launchers. At the same time, there are huge preparations for ground assault on Gaza, and that is the next point to which I'm going to address. The preparations and the necessity of a ground assault on Gaza. I spoke a few minutes ago about the absolute need that's felt across the country for an elimination of Hamas military capabilities, that Hamas military abilities must be eliminated. That's a consensus wall-to-wall across Israeli society, including Bedouin society around Beersheba. There is an emphasis in Bedouin society, several of whose members were killed in Saturday's attacks, that Israel must eliminate all Hamas military abilities. And this poses several challenges, because rocket launchers cannot be eliminated by air attacks, nor can the Hamas arsenal be eliminated simply by air attacks. On the other hand, the air attacks are necessary in order to eliminate as much as possible so that the ground assault is doable. So from Israel's point of view, we're in a stage of an advanced and extensive series of air attacks on all Hamas positions in Gaza, which will be followed at a time to be chosen at Israel's convenience by a ground assault. Now, that ground assault is a very, very complicated proposition. Israel has launched ground assaults on Gaza before. The ground assaults have been very difficult. Several of us remember the summer fighting of several years ago, which was called Tzuk Eitan in Hebrew, or Rock of Defense in English. The problem of fighting in a populated area is a serious one. The problem of booby-trap tunnels where you open a door, you move on the street, and the street explodes. The improvised explosive devices, the mines that will be certainly everywhere in Gaza. These are very serious problems of killing of Israeli fighters, and the problem of collateral damage to civilian populations, which is, of course, exacerbated by these booby-trap tunnels and so on. When a tunnel explodes near a house in Gaza, it kills both Israeli fighters and the Gazan civilians who are there. When Israel tries to bring down the house, thinking this is a booby trap in the alley, that kills Palestinian civilians. And so there's a very, very serious problem of how to launch a ground assault with minimal collateral damage to civilian population. I don't want to say how to launch a ground assault without collateral damage to the civilian population, because that's simply not possible. There will be damage to the civilian population. There will be civilians killed if civilians are there. The solution, of course, is for civilians not to be there. And for this reason, already on Sunday, there were instructions issued in Arabic by the Israeli army spokesperson to Gaza with detailed maps and detailed instructions of which areas must evacuate, right? People who are around Ras al-Balad, the city of Gaza, must move into the center of the city. People who are in Muazi were told to go into Muazi, and so on. You can go through the various instructions. I'm not going to give you a lesson on the geography of Gaza, but there is a very, very strong emphasis. These are the areas that we're not attacking. You need to be in those areas. And there was a demand by Israel that people congregate in those areas. Now, you'll notice that I want to focus on the last sentence of these instructions here. Those living in the southern end of the Strip were instructed to find shelter in Rafah along the Egyptian border. And that's an important point, which I want to address here, because the Egyptian border runs along the city of Rafah, the southern end of Gaza Strip. And from Israel's point of view, the simplest solution is for a humanitarian corridor to be open to where the green circle on the map is, where people from Gaza can go into Egyptian-held territory. There are still the remains of Rafah, Palestinian Rafah, on the Egyptian side of the fence, and people can find shelter there. This poses significant international challenges. Egypt has not expressed interest in this, but from a humanitarian point of view, if we're looking to balance the needs of Israeli security against the needs of the Palestinian population in Gaza, the opening of a humanitarian corridor south of Gaza towards into Egypt is the highest desideratum. And if you have any type of political influence, this point must be discussed. Inducements offered to Egypt to open that humanitarian corridor will be the only win-win possible outcome, where it's possible to preserve the needs of the civilian population in Gaza as well as the security needs of Israel. That opening of the southern Rafah crossing, today, Egypt requires a very cumbersome process to open the Rafah crossing. Only Palestinians who can prove that they are going from Egypt to a third country can enter through the Rafah crossing at the southern end of the Gaza Strip, where the green circle is on the map. For Egypt to allow any Palestinian to exit through that Rafah crossing, where the green circle is, would really solve many of the humanitarian problems in Gaza, which will be the inevitable result of the necessary Israeli ground invasion. Now, there's a very, very clear that there's a wide-scale assault in the offing. Again, I don't have the knowledge of when that assault will start, and if I had, I wouldn't share it, but I don't. And that assault is needed in order to deny Hamas the ability to attack Israel. This will have humanitarian implications for the Gaza Strip. This will have public diplomacy implications. In other words, there will be enormous anger when the ground assault starts. But there is not the sense in Israel that there is any alternative which will allow the state of Israel to continue to exist. A ground assault is necessary. We are dealing here with a very real threat to the basic security of the state of Israel, to the continued existence of the state of Israel. Therefore, a ground assault is necessary, and attempts have been made and will be made and are being made by the army to mitigate the civilian casualties among Gazans. You see here instructions which were issued on Sunday and which presumably will be updated when the army changes its targeting policies. But the only full-scale solution is the opening of the Rafah corridor where the green circle is, and the exiting of those Gazans who see themselves as civilians and do not want to support Hamas, exiting to Egypt for some period of time until the Hamas military machinery is completely dismantled in the Gaza Strip. Okay, those are, I think, the main points of the situation as I see it right now. I try to balance the need to discuss morale and to discuss military aspects to give a sense of what's going on. I'd like to introduce my student and also my colleague, Ruthie Lieberman, who is joining us from a different area of Israel. Ruth is a second-year archaeology master's student and a former municipal politician in Israel and has public diplomacy experience. She is here for two reasons. One, to share her own experiences, and two, because I didn't know I didn't know if there was going to have a missile attack on Beersheba, where I live, and if I was going to have to run to the safe room where I couldn't continue to broadcast to you. And so Ruthie was here as my backup, and I would like to give her an opportunity to share some of her perspectives, and then we'll open for questions right after that. So please welcome Ruth Lieberman, archaeologist, public diplomacy specialist, and former municipal politician. Thanks.
Hi, thanks, Shawn. I'm excited to be called your peer, but he's my professor. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time. I know everyone is concerned and has Israel on your mind, but it's not simple to just sit down and listen. So we really do appreciate that. I will start from the end just to add a bit to what Shawn said, and then I want to be a mom to you. That the things that we are doing in order to face the challenges that you described include working with politicians. And I know the Canadian government has been very supportive of Israel, and you have many friends there. And what we are trying to convince the U.S. Congress, and I welcome you to work in Canada, is one of what you mentioned, to induce Egypt to help. They have the key. They have to make sure, to stop any flow of weaponry now and in the future, and the other is to actually help us deal with Gaza and let those people in. We've asked them to do this in the past, not during war, and it hasn't worked. The other thing is to shut down any Hamas and even Fatah presence where they might have office space, they might be running organizations, foundations, and they have bank accounts. These are things that your political world knows and they follow, and they should shut it all down. That's what we're working on with the U.S. Congress, and it's relevant in every country in the world. Okay, so I am from Cleveland, Ohio. I moved to Israel when I was just finishing high school in the early 80s, and I came from a Zionist home, and that's why I came. So, if you say, what the heck are you doing there? Yeah, that's what I got from age-old time. That's what the Jews have been told to do. This is our homeland, and I'm here. I'm still a Browns fan. Anyone who watches American football might know what that means, and you can take pity on me. But meanwhile, we have a war, and I wanted to be a mom to you because Shawn gave a really compelling argument of how to see this situation, and it was very moving to even just see some of those pictures. I'm avoiding the social media and the news, and I just can't take it. I think you might not have that luxury. I think you need to stay updated and in the know because you need to tell others, and that's a main job that you all, I hope, feel a need to take on. Calling it a massacre is right. Some people call it a pogrom. Shawn's in Beersheba. I am in Gush Etzion, which is pretty much halfway between Bethlehem and Hebron. So I'm in the territories. We feel a little safer, although my husband's right now out and guarding at the gate, and they're having practice sessions to make sure we know what to do if there's an infiltration of terrorists, and we know how to lock up our homes, and our kids know what to do. And even that in itself is a horrible thing. And I'm glad we both made it through this, and we're so far both able to be here, and you don't have sirens and I don't have sirens, but that is our life right now. And you spend the time walking from place to place saying, okay, if I get past there, I'm going to run to there. And if I didn't, then I'm going to take shelter here. And I tell my kids, well, if you're going here, make sure you know where to go and take cover and how, and you cover your head. And I mean, these are surreal conversations that I don't wish on anybody, and not us either. I would say that I went to a couple funerals. I decided I'm not going anymore because I can't handle it. And we'll start having to go to the Shivas, the 7-day period of the mourning where you visit. And I'm sure that's going to take up a lot of the time. I do want to dedicate this, at least my part, to a brave soldier. I'm not going to cry. Of my friends, Mark and Debbie, they're from New York and Maine, and they moved here and they raised their children here, and their son's name is Aryeh, and that means lion. And apparently he fought like a lion, a commander, down on Saturday morning, and he fell on Shabbat. And so in Aryeh Ziering's memory, I would like to say that there are so many, many people, and we should put names and faces to this war, because they are all our sons. And I can tell you just one more thing about me to bring it home is we have 5 children. My daughter's newly married, and her new husband went in. They have spent a total of, I think, 4 days in their apartment living together as a young married couple, and he's gone to war. And my 2 sons are in New York and in Australia. They're both trying to get back. The Australian is on his way, and he just called while we were waiting for this to start that he was on his way from Dubai. They were going to spend 12 hours waiting, and El Al instead just came, and Dubai is full of Israelis, as apparently all over, and they're just shoveling them onto planes. They handed him a ticket. I think he's sitting in, I don't know, first class business, and they're just bringing these boys home. And when they get here, he's with 4 boys, and half of them are going straight to the front. Their parents are meeting them at the airport with all of their military equipment, and they're just sending them off. And my child, we said, no, you're coming home. And we're picking him up tonight in just a couple hours, and he'll sleep here. And I'm in his room, actually. And then he'll probably ship out in the morning and not even stay home with us for Shabbat. So that's what we're going through. When you talk about ground attacks, it's our boys. And when you talk about who wants peace, it's our children and our fathers and our husbands. And nobody wants peace more than we do. So when the world tells us how to act, I know that you are with us, and you know to say that Israel is so moral and so personal. And we really are fighting for Israel's life. I believe that Israel will sustain this, but the morale and the personal trauma that everybody's going through from the home front and the front is something that we will all have to gather and help each other through after also. So thank you for your time.
I just want to, before we go to questions, I just want to highlight one point for anyone who's not familiar with the geography. I hope you all see the map on the screen. Can everyone see the map? Yeah. This is the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip is surrounded on the north by Israel, and missiles are flying north. The Gaza Strip is surrounded on the east by Israel, and this is the arrows show the direction of the assaults that happened last Saturday, leading to the massacre, with the yellow area over here showing the parts of Israel where Hamas fighters infiltrated. The green circle marks the southern border of the Gaza Strip. That is the border with Egypt. The other side of that border is not Israel. The other side of the border is Egypt. If people wish to leave Gaza, that must be the direction in which they're going to leave, because Egypt is not at war with Gaza. Okay. I'm going to stop here and let Chava handle the questions. I'll stop the share. And Chava, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Shawn, and thank you very much, Ruti, for joining us from different parts of Israel, from Shawn from Beersheba, and Ruth, as you said, from Gush Etzion. The chat room is open for our viewers, the audience, to place your questions, comments, which I'm going to then share with our speakers. But as we are waiting for those comments to come in, let me just take advantage of the opportunity of your physical locations. So, Shawn, you're in the Negev. Ruti, you're in the territories. You're in, call it the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, depending on how you want to call the territories. One very important issue that, of course, we are hearing from our colleagues, friends in Israel, and also that we are reading about in analysis, is the very real possibility and prospect of one or maybe even two other fronts opening up. One, of course, is in the north. And if you could just comment on that and engage what Israel and Israelis, so not just the military, but also Israelis living in the northern communities along the Lebanese border, are expecting, anticipating, and how they cope with the anticipation of that threat, of that the possibility of a northern front, and in the West Bank, in the territories. We saw last night that there was heightened security alert in Jenin, and very recently, of course, there were also very important security actions and issues, problems precisely there. So how does Israel and, again, society deal with the anticipation right now, the fear and the threat of these other fronts potentially opening up?
Okay, I'll address the issue of the Northern Front, which I think has to be emphasized is the most serious threat here, because the Northern Front, the Lebanese, what we call the Lebanon Front, but it's really the Hezbollah Front, because the Lebanese army doesn't exist in any real fashion. There is an enormous presence of the Hezbollah military machine in Lebanon, which is controlled from Iran, funded by Iran, directed by Iran, and recruiting local people. The Hezbollah has the ability to launch missiles for an extended period of more than 2 or 3 days against Israel, and to make life in Israel unlivable. Hezbollah has that capability. And so right now what Hezbollah is doing is trying to aggravate people. Is Hezbollah, if we go back to that distinction I raised between basic security and current security, Hezbollah is focusing on being a current security threat, on launching a small raid here, launching a missile there, launching a drone in a different place. It's trying to keep the army busy in the north, disrupt Israel's defense against Hamas, but not cross the line into a basic security threat. This is probably about as much as can be expected normally from Hezbollah to keep the northern border and to avoid a basic security threat, a huge invasion, or a huge number of missiles. It is driving people in the north to be into very, very difficult circumstances. People are spending hours and hours and hours in bomb shelters and are in great fear of invaders coming in from the north. But at present, Hezbollah is not crossing the line into a extensive missile attack or an extensive invasion. In terms of the West Bank, my impression, at least, is that there is a very effective deterrent that Israel has placed in the West Bank, and that the Arabs of the West Bank have no interest at this point in attacking Israel. The vast majority of Arabs in the West Bank have no interest in attacking Israel. They know that their livelihood depends on Israel's stability, and they are the last people in the world to want Israel to collapse, at least in large part. I'll let Ruthie address that issue.
I can confirm that, Shawn. We're not going to discuss it in detail here. I am part of the security detail here, and we are protecting and taking measures but actually we're preparing to take in evacuees if and when they come, because the country has decided that this is an area of relative quiet and that it hopefully and should remain so, at least in terms of their military assessment of the area.
Yeah, the people who are fighting for the army in Jenin are part of the more extreme elements of Palestinian society who really are willing to sacrifice livelihood of others for the sake of their political goals. That does not necessarily represent the majority of West Bank Palestinians. Okay.
Thank you very much, Shawn. Yeah, there are lots of questions, so let's just start looking at those. Of course, and I'm not going to read out. I was asked before to keep perhaps some of the people who are asking questions anonymous, so I will just ask the question, if you permit me. One question, and I'm going to take them as a bundle, so maybe let me just share 3 questions at a time. The first one, any information about where Hamas got and is getting its weapons from? 1, 2, huge question, of course, about any update as to where Hamas, how Hamas was able to surprise Israel so successfully. And the third question in this bundle, and we'll have at least 1 or 2 more bundles of questions, is about the political paralysis that is hitting and plaguing the American Congress. Is there a concern that that political paralysis may have repercussions for the current situations and America's commitment and involvement on Israel's side?
I'm going to let Ruthie answer the third question, but I'm going to answer the first 2, which deal more with geography. Again, the question about where Hamas is getting its weapons, that is very much connected to the green circle you see on the map. You see on the map here the Gaza Strip. You see the border with Egypt. That border is a border with the Sinai Desert. The Sinai Desert is officially part of Egypt, but in the history of Egypt, and I can go back and discuss this extensively in the Middle Bronze Age and Late Bronze Age, which you don't want to hear about. But Egypt has controlled the Sinai Desert for thousands of years. It's from the time of the pharaohs. But the Sinai Desert is a place where sedentary people who live in farms cannot survive. The Sinai Desert in all historical periods is controlled by nomads. And the Arabic word for nomad is Bedouin. And so the Bedouin who roam the Sinai Desert and travel through it and really control its roads have, in some cases, been co-opted by Hamas and by its Iranian partners to promote, allow, encourage the flow of weapons through Sinai into Gaza, through that green circle, the Rafah crossing. There is an extensive tunnel network running from the Sinai side to the Palestinian side. The Egyptian army does not control what actually happens in Sinai, much less what happens on the Sinai-Gaza frontier. They do not have the personnel. They are not about to risk their own lives to fight against Hamas Bedouin allies to prevent weapons from reaching Gaza. So the most effective route for Hamas to bring weapons into Gaza is through Egypt, through the Rafah crossing, through the extensive tunnel network that runs under the Rafah crossing. So again, Egypt plays a role here. It is a lot to ask Egypt to put its soldiers' lives on the line for the sake of preventing weapons from reaching Gaza, but that is a necessary part of this, of the solution of this problem, is some effective force that prevents weapons from reaching Gaza. When Israel withdrew from Gaza many years ago in 2005, there was supposed to be a European Union monitoring mission at the Rafah crossing. That mission lasted about 2 weeks after the Israeli withdrawal. They were threatened by Hamas and they immediately left. And so there is a world responsibility to monitor the Rafah crossing, to monitor the crossing from Egypt into Gaza, and to try to prevent weapons from reaching Hamas in Gaza. The second question was about how did the attack surprise work? It was a combination of several points. There was an extensive Hamas disinformation attempt where there was continuous discussion of how there were protests on the fence, but those protests were going to die down, and there were agreements and so on. So there was an extensive Hamas-Israeli dialogue that went on in order to mask the preparations for the imminent attack. There's obviously an element of Israeli hubris, of belief that our technological means on the border fence will be enough to deter an attack, and very careful planning by Hamas. And as the attack went through several stages, there were missiles at the same time as there were explosives, at the same time as there was hacking of the computers. And so the people who were supposed to be watching the fence were in the bomb shelters because there were missiles. And then their computers were hacked so that they couldn't see the fence because the computers showed a quiet fence. And then by the time they realized what was happening, half the fence had been blown, or not, but 5 points of the fence had been blown up. And so there was a combination of factors. There was the Hamas masking attempt by lulling Israel into a false sense of security, Israel over-reliance on technology, and then the careful planning of the attack by Hamas. So those are three elements. Then there was a question about the U.S. Congress paralysis, and I'll let Ruthie handle that.
Right, the U.S. Congress. I don't know if you can see me. I don't see me.
I can see you. So.
Yeah, okay. Corey is just bringing you on the screen. There we go. I think we can all stay on the screen. Yeah, it's okay.
The paralysis, as you said, is a result of, well, right now, of the speaker's race. So if there's no speaker in the House of Representatives, people are saying, well, nothing can get done. And it's true that it has to be resolved soon. Myself and others are very, very close with Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise, and we know them to be upstanding people. And in terms of Israel, they're very solid. And we're very excited. And I've provided both of them with talking points, and more than that, what to do as soon as they're speakers. So we are looking forward to that. I don't mean to belittle it, but in terms of what Israel needs from America, they can do what they need to do now. We don't need legislation that takes two houses. We don't need serious budget funding. They have something called a CR in place. We won't go into too much technical, but it's a continuing resolution, and it means that they can temporarily fund decisions by Congress. So with Biden's speech that many of you probably saw, so pro-Israel, and we don't question his stand on Israel in general, and the fact that there's some U.S. military presence here. Some of you alluded to it in your questions. I think we have what we need from America. We're looking more towards the general public opinion, the UN, the start of when does Israel stop being treated with kid gloves, and maybe they'll start blaming us more. So I think we're looking more towards that struggle, and we're pretty sure that Congress can do what they can, even to budget and to act now with us.
Thank you very much. In the next bundle of questions, we have two questions, three really, but I think I will share all three of them, but one of them was already addressed to an extent, and they address different parts of the landscape, the strategic landscape. So we have a question which goes as follows. As a Muslim, I stand with peaceful coexistence of Israel and Palestine. Can there be a two-state solution ever? Will the ghetto in Gaza cease to exist? Will the bloodshed on both sides stop? The next question is about military and American involvement in the region. As many viewers in the audience might have, just want to give a very brief context that the large carrier fleet, the USS Gerald Ford, arrived in the Eastern Mediterranean. And the question is what it would take for the US carriers to actually attack Hezbollah. And so if you have any insight on that. And the third question is why Israel was so unprotected in the south. I think you addressed this, Shawn, already, but if there's anything else you would like to add, of course.
Okay, so I'll start with the first question. I think it's a very important question. Where does the strategic landscape go, and what is Gaza? Okay, so the ironically or otherwise, the fact that the U.S. is effectively deterring Hezbollah now. And let me go back for about 20 minutes. I raised the question of, is Hezbollah being deterred by the U.S.? Is Hezbollah being deterred by Israel, or by a combination? To the extent that Hezbollah is being deterred by the U.S., Israel then owes the U.S., right? This is the same process we saw way back when in the early 1990s, when in the Iraq War, U.S. deterred Iraqi attacks on Israel, and then the Madrid process started. I don't know if anyone still remembers the Madrid process, but the Madrid process was supposed to lead to a negotiation between Israel and a non-PLO Palestinian Jordanian delegation. And that was the price that the U.S. exacted for the deterrence of Iraq. And presumably the U.S. will extract a similar price after this war is over. And the U.S. will demand some progress towards Palestinian self-government in the West Bank. Gaza is a more complicated question. The Gaza ghetto, which is one way of formulating, and I think it's the Gaza. I don't think the word ghetto is really correct here. The Gaza enclosure is formed on two sides by Israel and one side by Egypt. And the question of whether Gazans can have a more peaceful and economically productive and future depends on strategic cooperation between Israel, Egypt, and the rest of the Arab world. Now, there's a very, very unpopular person who recognized this and addressed it in his peace plan, and that person, whether we like him or not, is Mr. Trump. One of the elements of his peace plan, which people didn't pay attention to, and it's a really important element, is that in order to address the issue of Gaza, you need to have more land and economic development. In other words, land needs to be donated by Egypt. Land needs to come from the Egyptian side of the Sinai line. Egypt needs the funding for turning that land, making that land productive, can come from the rest of the Arab world. And the residents of Gaza, who number somewhere over 1 million and possibly close to 2 million, can then begin to have an economically productive future where they're not crowded and where they have access to the outside world, and where, and once that is achieved, then there can also be discussion of transit through Israel to the West Bank. In the current political reality, it is completely impossible for Israel to allow Gazans to transit through Israel to the West Bank. That was discussed in the Oslo Accords. It was tried for a very brief time, and it collapsed when people who were part of that, or people who were part of the Gazans crossing Israel into the West Bank, engaged in terrorism. And so for the present, that is not possible. The solution has to be through Egypt. Then there's a question of the overall security of Israel's south. Someone raised that question. I'll just, again, call up the map to make the point a little bit clearer. When we talk about the security of Israel's south, it's important to recognize there is a doctrine which Israel has inherited from the time of Ben-Gurion, which is that we plow up to the last centimeter, right? In Hebrew, it's ad hatelem ha'acharon, until the last furrow, that every piece of land up to the fence is to be treated as Israeli territory. We do not have a security zone on our side of the fence. We do not say that there's a no-go area up to the fence. We treat all the land on our side of the fence, and we have settlements that are only a kilometer or less from the Gaza fence. That has security implications, because it means you have to have a really effective barrier along the fence, and that barrier was not sufficiently effective. That's the sad reality that we're dealing with. Okay. All right, Chaba, I'll take, I think.
And the third question was about the carrier, the USS Gerald Ford and the fleet. And
right, can that effectively deter?
What it would take for it to be?
Right. My answer is that it would take a decision by Hezbollah and by Iran to launch a basic security attack against Israel, where Hezbollah would begin to use its extensive missile arsenal and send missiles all the way through northern and southern and central Israel. If that happens, then there will be a U.S. response. I do not think that a U.S. response is likely short of that happening. The type of attacks that Hezbollah has launched in the last 24 hours have not been of the sort that a U.S. response is likely to be forthcoming. Ruthie, I'm happy to hear your perspective on this if you wish, or Chaba.
I would add half a sentence that I do not believe Israel is interested in the U.S. becoming involved with ground forces right now in any way. That may change if it gets more drastic.
Thank you. So we only have a few minutes left. It is late for you in Israel, and we are very, very thankful that you gave us this time, Ruthie and Shawn. So let me just share maybe one last question, maybe a question and a half. One is from a former dear student who would like to hear your views about what impacts all of this might have on internal Israeli politics, especially once the emergency has passed, especially provided and hopefully that Israel ends it with a victory over Hamas. So how Israeli politics will unfold, domestic politics will unfold after all of this is over. And maybe one other question, just very quickly, if you have any information or comment about Turkey and Turkey's position and attitude to all of this.
Okay, I'll address the first question. I'm not sure I have a lot to say about Turkey, but it's an important point. The Israeli internal politics. So one of the only nice thing to emerge out of all of this is that all of the political divisions that were so drastically on display for the last 7 months, with huge demonstrations and people saying they refuse to serve in the army, have completely collapsed. And rather than refusal to serve, you have overwhelming desire to serve. You have thousands of people. I was told this morning, and I won't tell from where, that there are 80-year-olds coming to army bases demanding to volunteer. They're being occupied right now by telling younger fighters about their war stories from the wars of the past, some of which have practical lessons. But there is overwhelming support, and the divisions have really, really collapsed. And when we talk about things that collapsed on Saturday morning, one of the things that collapsed Saturday morning were the divisions in Israeli society. They simply don't exist anymore. Nevertheless, those divisions will reemerge once the emergency passes, assuming the emergency passes. However, when they reemerge, they will reemerge against the background that for 4 months, or 3 months, or 2 months, or 1 month, or however long it takes for this to pass, for a certain period of time, we were able to cooperate. And so people will be much less likely to say statements like Yair Golan made several months ago: if Israel will not be a liberal democracy, which means he means a liberal democracy in the form that I believe, then Israel will not exist. Yair Golan is a former deputy chief of staff and a Knesset member was a Knesset member for the Meretz Party, and has been a leading figure in the demonstrations against Netanyahu. And was a hero on Saturday who went and rescued many injured people. And so no one will be able to say anymore after this ends, if Israel isn't going to be the kind of Israel I want, then it won't exist, because everyone understands that we're in this together. And that's a together that cuts across Jewish society, and it cuts across Bedouin society, and it cuts across many, many sectors in the Israeli public. Okay, I don't unfortunately have anything intelligent to say about Turkey, other than to say that Turkey has a history of supporting Hamas, and also trying to work with Israel, and playing a kind of back and forth across the fence. Certainly certainly a message from the U.S. to Turkey that time is past would be extremely helpful.
Shawn and Ruthie, thank you very much. We are reaching the end of the hour, and I would just like to say a huge thank you to the student group, Startup Nation, and its president and founder, Anastasia Zorchinsky, who played a very important role in collaborating and spreading the word about this briefing that we were so fortunate to on our campus, that we were so fortunate to bring onto our screens with you, Shawn, and with you, Ruti. Once again, thank you very, very much, and we wish you safety. We wish peace to be restored soon and quickly to Israel, to the land, and we stay tuned to hear from you as this unfolds. But in the meantime, be well. We wish safety and comfort to your families. Ruti, may you be safely reunited with your son, with your family, and Shawn. We are just so grateful that you didn't have to run to the shelter, at least during this hour.
Very glad for this quiet hour. Right? Yesterday at this time we had an attack. So thank you. Thank you and shalom to everyone.
Thank you for your smiles.